Hey folks, Thomas here. Welcome back to Mir's Lab. In today's video, we're going to have a behind the scenes tour of the making of the Weezer 7-string guitar cover. We're going to dig right into things like the gear that we used, like the Jackson JS22 7-string guitar, the software that I used for it, which is Reason 10. We're going to have a look at the outboard settings for all of the rack equipment that was used. We're going to talk about the drum software that I used for the drum sound on this from Reason, which is called Redrum. And we're going to look at the arrangement, we're going to solo all of the tracks and dig right into the EQ and the dynamics and the compressor settings and the effects. And we're even going to discuss the mastering and a whole bunch of other stuff too. So without any further ado, let's get started. Here is the guitar that I used for all of the guitar tracks on the Weezer 7-string guitar cover. This is a Jackson JS Series Dinky Archtop JS22-7 DKAHT. That's the full model name for it. There's a close-up of the body of it there. And there's the headstock right there. You can see there's the back of the headstock. And there's the back of the guitar right there. This is a great guitar, even though it's their entry-level model and it's the most basic 7-string that you can get from Jackson. Something that I really like about it is honestly, it kind of feels like their more expensive guitars do. Like, it has a really good feel. The neck really feels great, and it really feels great to dig in with the right hand. What I mean by that is the body of the guitar is very resonant, and so when you hit chords, like, you can really feel the guitar vibrating in your hands, and it's a really great, powerful feeling when you play it. And I like to feel great and powerful when I play 7-string guitar, so I think that it works really good for this guitar. The only issue I really have with it is I find that the low B string on it goes out of tune fairly frequently. It's hard to keep it bang on in tune, which is kind of a bummer because that's sort of like the whole reason you get the guitar. But, you know, it works good enough for now, at least for what my needs are. And although I do want a really nice 7-string guitar, like a really fancy Ibanez or something, you know, or maybe one of the higher end Jacksons. But once again, you know, for what I need, this guitar is just fine. This is the bass guitar that was used on the recording. It is a Sterling by Music Man, and this is a Ray 5-string Stingray bass. And I think that the name of this finish is Walnut Satin. There's a close-up of the body right there. There's the back of the body. And there's the headstock right there. And there's the back of the headstock right there. So this is an active bass, and I think that this might be sort of like the entry-level 5-string model from Sterling. But this one, a lot like the Jackson JS22, is I feel like it feels like a nicer instrument than it really is in this sort of price point. And the strings are really nice and tight, and the low B on it just sounds fantastic all of the time. It never really sounds too like loose or anything, and the intonation is really solid on this bass. And all around, it's the tone of this bass is so good, just all on its own without anything else. This bass can like pretty much just hold up a mix all by itself because there's just so much depth to the tone on it, you know? I really, really, really like this sound, and it works really good with I don't know, it just mixes really easily, I find. Anyways, if you can't tell, I'm really a big fan of these Ernie Ball Stingray basses, and I couldn't do what I do here in the studio without this bass for sure. I only used one pedal on this recording, and I didn't even really use it. It's a Korg Pitch Black tuning pedal, but this is the one that I like to use in the studio to tune with. I also use the tuner built into Reason software as well, but sometimes it's just handier to have a floor pedal tuner handy when you're recording because it makes it a little faster to work, I find. This is a TubeWorks RT-2100 and it's an electric guitar amplifier, and this is the amp that I used for all of the electric guitar sounds on the song. This is a bit of a weird amplifier, and here's what I've been able to find out about it. So it was made back in the probably late 80s or early 90s, and you can see that the concept and design is by this B.K. Butler fella here, which I don't know much about B.K. Butler, but they sure do know how to make a great sounding amplifier, that's for sure. It says it's handmade in the USA here, and it's a 2-channel real tube / Moss valve amplifier. And by the way, if you want to have a closer look at the inside of this amp, I have another video where I take the whole thing apart, and there's a whole bunch of really nice detailed close-up views of the inside of it. And that's where I go to like spray out all the potentiometers on it because they sounded a little scratchy when I first got it. So be sure to check that out if you are interested. But what they mean by this real tube Moss valve thing is the amp is like a hybrid amplifier. It has tube preamps in it. It has two 12AX7 preamp tubes on the inside of it here. I think probably one for each channel maybe. And then it uses a Moss valve, what they call a power amp section, which I don't know a lot about Moss valves, but when I looked at them, they just look like big transistors is really what they are. But you know, they've got some sort of like fancy magical electrical engineering something going on inside of this amplifier, because it doesn't sound like really any other hybrid amplifier I've heard before. It has this interesting anti-feedback circuitry that's sort of always running all the time in this amplifier, and I suspect that that has something to do with the way that it feels. And that's the thing I like about this amplifier the most, besides the tone, is it has like this magical feel through this amplifier. I just can't describe it. It's just like, it feels so like powerful to play through. I don't know any better way to put it than that. And it really feels organic and natural, and it's not a tube amp. It doesn't feel like a tube amp, but what it does feel like is awesome. It feels like something kind of totally different and that I haven't really felt before, you know? It's pretty cool. Anyways, I really, really dig this. And as you can see, you know, we'll dig more into the controls here later on, but yeah, I usually keep the gain pretty much all the way dialed up here on the amplifier, which is typically a kind of like a no-no in the world of recording, right? But hey, you know, if it sounds good, it is good. That's my philosophy. Just a look at the speakers that are in the amplifier. It's got two of them that are mounted vertically. And they're these TubeWorks 8-ohm 12G speakers. I don't really know much about them. I don't know what the wattage of the speakers is, but I think that the amp is 100 watts. Here's the back of the amplifier. You can see that it's got a couple of speaker outputs. It has a 4-ohm minimum output. And it's got a really nice effects loop built into this, which is fully foot switchable as well too. I really like that it has, like, you can adjust the gain of the loop on it here. You can add a little bit more signal with the send control, and you can tailor the receive amount just to get your levels just right on it. And it's really nice, you know, like they really did a good job of the effects loop on this amplifier. And you can see you can plug the foot switch in a few different ways here. You can get it to control the reverb in the channel and the stack in the channel. And I use a foot switch when I'm recording with it all the time, because whenever I'm not recording the distortion, I always turn it back onto the clean channel, because as quiet as the amplifier is, which is pretty good, I gotta say, for the amount of gain that comes in of it, it's still really loud because I use so much gain all the time, you know. So I typically use the foot switch when I've finished tracking a dirty guitar part, and I put it back to the clean mode so that it doesn't it's not like annoyingly loud in the background when I'm trying to focus on the mix or something. I prefer to use this Sennheiser E906 for all my guitar sounds. And I'm not sure if you can see the mic placement of it too well there, but I try to keep it pointed basically at the point where the cone and the dome sort of meet each other, and that way it gets like a bit of the sort of beef from the cone, and it gets some of the treble from the dome as well too. And when I use this microphone, I always put the switch in the upper position as well too. And I prefer this because it gives me a really natural, crisp guitar sound. And I get a lot of natural treble frequencies out of it with this microphone and sort of outboard setup that I use here. And because the natural tone of the amplifier is actually quite crisp and clear itself. And that's really important because I'd much rather pull away treble and high frequencies than have to add them in later, because it always adds noise if I have to bring up the treble. So I want to capture as much treble as possible out of the amplifier, but not so that it sounds brittle or harsh or anything. I always want it to sound balanced, of course, but I always make sure that I'm getting enough treble out of the guitar signal, because I've found that it always just sounds dull and muddy when you don't have enough clarity in your signal. Here is my rack of recording equipment that I use. On the bottom, this is the audio interface I am currently using. It's a Focusrite Scarlett 18i8, and I think this is Mark III generation. When it's whatever the most current one is, it's that one, which I think is a Mark III. And this is an old secret trick I use here. I'm a really big fan of these rack processors from the late 80s and early 90s that absolutely nobody would be caught using these days. But I'm telling you, some of these old rack units that are for sale for 50 or 100 bucks are absolutely diamonds in the rough. And this one is absolutely stunning. And for anybody that's watching, I'm telling you, number 12 is the secret trick on this one. It's like a super big, long reverb. And it kind of gives like a Devin Townsend feel to the guitar, is what I like about it. You can put it on pretty much anything, even like snare drums, but it works really great on guitars or vocals or acoustic instruments or whatever. And it just gives like this haunting sort of feel to everything. And it's really, really nice. There's a lot of really great stereo guitar sounds built into this, and someday we'll take a deep dive on it. You can see I've sort of customized mine with this knob over here, and basically what that is it's the mix fader on these always dies on them. So what I did is I just ripped it out of there, and then I replaced it with this. I think this is a dual throw potentiometer, if I remember correctly, and it doesn't do anything special. I mean, it basically just replaces that, but it looks kind of cool. I like that, got like a big crazy looking knob like that. Anyways, here's the moving on. Here's the mic pre and EQ that I use for all the guitar sounds. This is a Warm Audio WA73 EQ, and it is a clone of the classic Neve 1073 with a couple of extra bells and whistles built into it. Let me just move that cable out of the way so it's a little easier to see. I typically run this in the 30 to 40 dB gain range, something sort of around there sort of place. And I'm basically always getting the guitar signal to sort of hang out around the 0. And I don't usually let it go to +8 unless I'm feeling kind of funky that day. And I pretty much never run it at -8. Always right at 0 in the middle, because I want to have a really nice saturated guitar sound. And that's just sort of part of my sound that I like here and the way I prefer to use it. But every once in a while, yeah, I will push it a little hotter, a little less, just for fun or whatever, I suppose we should look at these buttons over here too. Phantom power, whatever, pretty self-explanatory. Polarity, yeah, same thing, of course, too. Tone, that just changes like the input impedance of this, and it can sort of subtly change the sound of your mics and sort of warm them up, or sort of like make them maybe even a little bit more clear sounding. And I pretty much never use it, like I don't know, I haven't really messed around with it much, but maybe someday I will, it's just something fun to look forward to. You can change the input level to line instead of mic, and you can use the insert here, and that's how I have the Moog 10-band graphic EQ setup. This is inserted into the WA73, but it's really handy because if when I push the button, it inserts it into the signal, but when I leave it out, then it's not inserted. So it's really cool. I typically use the Moog EQ for bass stuff, and pretty much just that. And then you can also just turn on the DI input right here on the front. Okay, let's keep looking at the controls. Yeah, it's got, oh yeah, you know what, we're going to get more into this later, so let's just keep moving on here, okay? Yeah, I already talked about the Moog 10-band graphic EQ for a second there, but we'll dig into that more a little bit later. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to show you up here is the Warm Audio WA2A, and that is a copy of the Teletronics Universal Audio, the LA2A, and that's a tube opto compressor. And I use this for all the guitar and all the bass as well too. And oh yeah, by the way, I use that for all the bass tracks as well too. The software that I used for recording this song, as well as pretty much everything audio related here at Mears Lab, is Reason 10 by Propellerhead. I've been a long time Propellerhead Reason user ever since version 7, and I'm currently using version 10. I sure would love to have the latest version, but I just haven't sort of sprung for it yet. So, hey, if you're listening out there, Propellerhead, I sure would love a free version of the latest version of your software. I love Reason. Anyways, back to the video here. Yeah, like I said, I've been a long time user ever since version 7, and the reason why I like to use Reason is pretty plain and simple. Frankly, it's because of the sound of the software. Like, it doesn't really have like a unique tonal characteristic per se, but I just found that mixes that I made with this software compared to some of the other ones that I was very experienced with at the time, like Cubase and Pro Tools and Logic and GarageBand, I could more quickly and more funnily get to what I felt was a great sounding mix with Reason. And that's basically all the kind of, I know it sounds corny, but all the reason I needed to switch, you know? And it just sort of has like a really natural sound. Something I really, really like about the software is this, is the built-in mixer, which emulates an SSL, I think it's an SSL G series console. And it sounds awesome, and it's just really fun to work with it. You know, I really like, you know, the input section here and how all the dynamics and the EQ works and the effects, and it's just a lot of fun to play with. And it doesn't really feel like software, you know, it's about as close to the real thing as you can get. And that's something that it shares with Cubase that I really liked, you know. And Cubase has a really nice mixer built into it. But I kind of feel like this mixer is a kind of more funky mixer or something. I don't know. There's just something to it. I really like using it, you know? Like I said earlier, I made the full switch to a version, to Reason around version 10. And I think that might have been the version where they started allowing the use of VST plugins within the software. It was either maybe version 9 or 10 or so. And but that, oddly enough, wasn't really the reason I made the full switch. It was just because of totally unrelated reasons that I did. But just speaking on plugins, is I do use a couple of plugins, mostly just for dynamics use, just a little bit and a little bit of limiting and effects. But part of my sort of philosophy in the studio is I actually try to use as few plugins as possible. I try to steer away from them as much as I possibly can, for a couple of reasons. Probably the biggest reason is I feel like, you know, like, this is how we are going to stand up to the machines, is we are going to keep a part of humanity all to ourselves. And the part of that that we are going to keep is we're not going to give the control to the machines over our art. You know, like, I want to keep the decisions and the part I feel is important to the art of making music up to me and not a computer. So I want to keep as much of it away from the computer as possible, because I'm a firm believer in, you know, if you don't want your music to sound like it was made by a computer, then don't make it with a computer. Of course. But then again, we also live in 2022, and computers are pretty much essential to make music. And not just essential, they're awesome at making music, you know? But they are not the be-all, end-all of music. And we have to always remember what the most important part of making music is, and it is us. It is the human. It is the art. And, you know, it's up to each one of us to decide how we incorporate that into our own music. And that's part of how I decide to do it, is I rely on the computer as little as possible. And I try to keep the art in my hands in the form of instruments and hardware and things that a computer just simply cannot do all by itself. Yeah, speaking on that, yeah, I didn't mean to get so heavy there, but anyways, yeah, that means a lot to me, you know? All of the drum sounds in this recording were made with Reason's built-in software drummer called Redrum. And I think this has basically been like sort of like the main drum piece of software with Reason for a really long time, and it's It's just a really basic step programmer, you know. It's nothing really fancy to it, but I really like how simple it is. It reminds me of like the very first drum software I used to use a super long time ago, which was, I think it was called Drumulator or something like that. It was really, really old school. Man, that was going way back. But it's super easy and simple to use. And I use it with this pattern select feature. So what I do is I program the patterns in here, and say for example, and then I'll like name them like A2, like group A, and pattern 2, and then like for this section right here, like that's the, what section is this? It's the, yeah, that's the first. So that's like, say, pattern A2, and then for this section, which is I switch to a ride setting right here, I use a different pattern, and that's pattern A1. And so this is how I program the drums, is I set up all the patterns in the song to match the sort of beats that I want to make, and I program them from scratch with ReDrum. And then here's all the patterns you can see, and then like as the song sort of plays through, it go and selects these different sort of patterns and switches the pattern as it goes along, you know. And you can see as I click in the different sections how the pattern changes over here. And then the other cool thing about how this works, let's just zoom in a little bit here to this section. And you can overlay MIDI over top of these, and you can see that's what these squares are right here. And what I often will do here is, say for this section right here in A3, let's just play the beat here. That beat is basically just consists of, say, like just a kick drum part. You can see here's just 2 kick hit. This is like the boom, 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 boom. And then here's the snare, which is the psh, psh. And then there's nothing else on any of these other tracks except for the open hi-hats, which are right here. And they're just like 4 hits there, right on the 1, the 5, the 9, and the 13. And then there's no crash on this. And I didn't put the crash on here because then it would repeat every bar. And I don't want the crash to hit at the start of every bar. Just at the start of every second measure or something. I don't know. I'm not like a music theory sort of guru or anything, but basically I only want the crash to be there, but not there. You know what I mean? Or there or whatever. So I just want the crash to go every once in a while. So let me just play it through and you'll see what I mean here. Crash. Here comes another one. There's none right here. Right here. Nope. Over here. Anyways, it's a little. It took me a while to sort of get my head like wrapped around how that sort of worked, you know, because I sort of have sort of 2 control inputs for the drum pattern that's playing at all times. There's like the main sort of track here that says this is the pattern to play, and then this one up here is sort of, I look at like fills, you know. This is where I put in crash hits and like tom hits and like snare rolls and fills and things like that, you know, like further back in the song over here. Let's zoom right in over there. Let's go over here. So where are we at? So this is right at the end of the solo here. And that was just way too complicated to program into a pattern, so I really wanted to get into some in-depth MIDI programming. So let's just close that down for a second, and let's double-click on this, and then we can look at the MIDI hits closer up, and I'll zoom in a bit further here. And you can see this is the kick drum, and there's the snare, and there's that crash. You can see that right here there's a kick and a snare that plays at the same time, and then there's like a whole bunch of snare hits here. And I had to alter the velocity of a few of those hits just to get the feel to sort of sit right, you know? But you can see here's the velocity of all the snare hits, and there's where the snare hits are on the grid as well. So let me just play that through here, and you can see as the line here scrolls through how it sounds. And just one more time with a little bit more lead into it, like from here. Yeah, neat, eh? Oh yeah, we should talk about what preset I use for the actual drum sounds. And I use this Dub Lab Heavy Kit preset. And where do you, I don't know, you just find that in the regular drum kit presets somewhere with it. I don't know. I don't know exactly where to find it. I've been using it for a super long time. And I think that all of these are the stock sounds that come with the kit. I might have changed the crash symbol, and I definitely changed the ride symbol. And the ride symbol sample I use is this RD underscore DH2 underscore May. And the crash is this CYM1 space 10HSH.AIF. You know, the crash sounds very important to me to get that just right, and it has to have a lot of it has to have a really long sustain to it. I really like that. You know, all truths be told, I'm not actually super pleased with the crash sound I'm getting. I'd rather it be sort of more stereophonic, if you will. What I'm a much bigger fan of is always having two crashes go and having them slightly panned left and right, so you sort of get that doubling effect. But I haven't really integrated that into my recordings just yet. But that's something I am planning on working towards. I've just been too lazy to do it, perfectly honest. There's the ride. That's nice. I usually turn that volume up a little bit more. And here's the kick. There we go. And the snare. And yeah. And oh yeah. And let's just talk about the dynamics that I use when I'm programming these parts. Basically, kicks are always programmed with the hard dynamic and the snares as well. And then the hi-hats and cymbals are always done with medium dynamic hits, except for on the one. Say like if I have like a crash part that's going all four of them will be medium hits except for the first one, which will be a hard hit on the one, because that just gives the mix a little bit more breathing room and a little bit more dynamic range and organics. Yeah. What else can I say? Some of these beats are done, most of them are done in a 1/16th resolution, but every once in a while I'll do one in a 1/8th resolution. I wonder if I have any of those on this song that are 1/8th resolutions. I don't think I did that in this song. Yeah, they're all 1/16th resolutions. But sometimes if I want to have a more complex or just a longer repeating pattern, but it's not very complex, I'll often instead use this 1/8th resolution instead of 1/16th. Because if I don't need to put in 1/16th parts, then I can get like a longer repeating part and have more complexity in the variance of the simplicity of the beat rather than the complexity of it. And I think that that's a really powerful arrangement idea. And it's just a different way to approach creating patterns instead of using the edit steps and the steps feature here. Because another way, for example, you could have a longer pattern is by increasing the steps to say 32 here. I'm going to put that back to 16 so it doesn't mess everything up. And then you just go and you can select sort of like the steps that you're editing here, which is sort of similar to like how like an electron sequencer would work on like one of their drum machines or synthesizers, or like the A/B pattern feature and on like an old Roland 808 or something like that. Is like that's what this edit steps feature is. But I don't like that. It feels too computery to me when I work like that and with these steps. It feels computery, and using the 1/8 keeps things simpler. And if you don't need it to be complex, then don't make it complex, you know. And it just feels more human, sort of like, I don't know, you know. That's a little bit there. And what else? Anything else? I don't really use the flam feature too often. And I definitely didn't use it in this recording at all. I don't know. It just always sounds sort of robotic to me. It just never really sounds natural. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a bit more stuff about Redrum. The video editing software that I use is DaVinci Resolve Studio, and this is, I think it might be version 17. Yeah, Studio 17. And yeah, I've been using this for a few years now, and it's a pretty great piece of software. I really like to edit videos with this. Anyways, I thought I'd just make a quick mention about that. And also another thing while I'm here is if you're curious, I'm using a little bit of a different microphone for this part. This is a Rode K2, and I'm running it through the Warm Audio WA73 EQ, and I am also running it through the WA2A right now. And for the rest of the video, just for anybody else curious, I mostly used a Rode VideoMic NTG or a wireless Go for the other shots. The camera I use here at Mears Lab is a Canon RP, and I film everything in 1080. These are the lenses that I use here. It's a RF 50mm and a 16,
And right now I have a Tiffin Pro Mist 1/8 filter on here, but I think for the Weezer video I actually used a black Pro Mist 1/8 for the whole video. And I typically use these at f2.8 pretty much all the time. And then I'll run with like manual focus most of the time, and sometimes autofocus if I need to, because autofocus is also cool.
Here's a crazy Dutch angle shot of the crazy Neewer NL480 light that I use here. It's bicolor, it's LED, it's cheap, it gets the job done. There's really only two ways that I use the controls on the guitar. The tone control might as well not even be there because I basically just leave it up all the time. And the volume, I basically just use that for volume swells and just to, just to control the amplifier in between takes. And then the pickup selector, of course. And I use all three positions in this recording. Whenever there is a distorted guitar track, it is most of the time going to be the bridge pickup here. But I pretty much double almost every single guitar track on this recording. And if there is a distorted guitar, this is pretty much the way it's done 9 times out of 10, is I will use the bridge pickup setting here on one track, and then I'll double it, and I'll play it on the neck pickup with the exact same settings on the amplifier. And then I hard pan this one to the left and that one to the right, or sometimes I'll flip that depending on the song. And it gives it this really thick, deep, wide sound. And that's basically the setup for the guitar sound that is on the recording. Is just double tracked heavy guitars, one of them through the bridge pickup and one through the neck pickup. I've been pretty much using the same amplifier settings my entire guitar playing career ever since I was a teenager. And, as try as I might, I just can't seem to gravitate away from what works, and I gotta say, I really like the way that it sounds, and I think that there's something to just going with what feels right, because it always sort of reinforces that old golden rule I like, which is if it sounds right, it is right, so, and I really like to try to live by that rule. So here's how I do it. Whenever there's a distorted guitar sound, it's always the the first channel on this amplifier, which sort of tells me a little bit about what their intentions were when they designed the amplifier, that they meant for it to be a distortion machine, because the distortion channel is channel number 1 on this amplifier. I think that's really cool. So it has 2 gain stages in this amplifier. It has like a drive knob here, and then it has a stack function, which is, you're sort of like stacking another layer of gain on top of the first one. And it is just like over the top the amount of distortion that you can get out of this amplifier. It just sounds wonderful. And I use them both all the way up full blast. And it looks like I've got a text coming in there. Better check that out. Yeah, you can stack the 2 different gain stages in this amplifier. And so I basically just leave them turned up all the way, both of them, because it just sort of, I don't know, it just gets kind of unruly and sort of fun sounding then. I push the high frequencies just a little bit on the amplifier, just maybe at like 5.5, and I leave the mids at flat, and sometimes I'll even turn the mids down a little bit because I really like that scooped mid sound, but I don't want it to sound too hollow, the recording either, though, right? So I got to keep some mids in there. Which is that's a tough one for me, because teenage Thomas doesn't want there to be any mids inside the guitar sound, but like adult Thomas knows that they kind of have to be there, so I let some of them squeak in there, but I always make sure I turn the high and the low up a little higher than the mids, because I always want to get that smiley face sound going on, and I know what they say about the smiley face graph EQ setting, but you know what, I like it. Yeah. So speaking of that, yeah, the low I turn up a little there. It's usually at 5.5 or 6, something like that. Then the master I just leave at around 5 here. I suppose I could kind of push the master on this channel a bit higher if I wanted to get even more gain out of the amplifier, but I kind of like to just leave it there because I do switch between these channels, and I like the convenience of keeping them at a relatively similar volume level for when I'm recording, because it makes it a little easier for mixing down the road. Okay, let's look at the clean channel here. I change the settings on this one sometimes, but I pretty much never change the settings on the distortion channel. For the clean channel, the volume is sort of like the gain level or like the amount of saturation, and I pretty much always leave it at 6. But I think on the recording I actually turned the gain up all the way to like 10 on it for some of the sounds. Maybe I can't remember for sure. Maybe like the rhythm guitar sound, like the main sort of clean guitar riff, I think might have been at 10, but it was either there or at 6 for sure. Sometimes I just add more gain to the clean channel just to give it a little bit more body or girth. It doesn't actually distort it too much, but it does do it enough, you know. But it still sort of sounds clean. Yeah, the master I leave a little higher than the distortion channel because I find for the gain settings that I'm using, that sort of keeps things at a pretty balanced volume level. The tone controls I leave set pretty much the same on the clean channel as the distortion channel. And yeah, I just boost the highs and the lows a little bit, but leave the mids basically right in the mid position. The effects loop, I didn't use any external effects through the amplifier for the recording, but if I ever do, I typically just leave this sort of set, sort of like 15 to 20% and maybe up to 50%, and then I run the effects in a totally 100% wet configuration, like externally from the amp, I mean. This amp has great, awesome sounding Accutronics reverb. It's really long. It sounds super duper nice. I really like it on the clean channel, but frankly, I don't think I actually used any of the spring reverb on this Weezer recording. I'm pretty sure I didn't use any. It sounds really nice for the clean channel, but I don't like the spring reverb at all on the dirty channel. They don't really play well together. But for the cleans, it sounds really nice. It's foot switchable, which is handy too. And the master, this is important to get this set at the right volume because I find that the master is the thing that sort of gives you that push and pull feel with the amplifier, you know, like that sort of organic feeling that you get. This is how you achieve it with this amplifier, is you just got to get the volume at the right setting, and it's sort of just like a tube amplifier, you know? Like, when it's too quiet, it sort of is a little dull to play through. When it's too loud, it's like unwieldy, unless you're playing like a wicked gig, and then it's always great if it's too loud, you know? But like, so I try to find the sort of the butter zone here, and sort of keep it like around, I don't know, maybe like at like 3.5, or 4. I like it when the guitar is just starting to erupt into feedback and chaos and just being a little unruly, you know, or maybe a little too unruly, you know, just sort of in that threshold range where it's just about to like break out, you know. That's sort of the volume that I like to keep it at because it's really playful. It's really fun to play around with the harmonics and the feedback and things that happen in between the notes. But I don't know if you remember earlier I mentioned about keeping the foot switch handy. That's why I do it, so that in between takes I can just quickly switch back to the clean channel and put the amp into like normal mode rather than unruly, crazy, dirty mode, you know?
All right, let's have a look at the settings for the outboard gear here. Okay, well, I guess we'll just start with the preamp here. Basically, the guitar is always set at pretty much 30 to 40 dB of gain. I think I talked about that earlier where, you know, I always try to keep the gain staging around 0 dB on here for the most part, and that's definitely what I did on this recording. For the high pass filter, I always leave it set at pretty much 80 for guitars. Sometimes I'll push it down to 50, but I pretty much leave it set at 80 all of the time. And if I'm doing a solo, sometimes I'll push it all the way up to 160 as well, and that just helps the sort of the solo to cut through the mix a little bit more and keep a lot of beef on the guitars as well too, you know, on the rhythm guitars. So rhythm guitars are usually 80 and solos are 160. I also put the bass through this, and when I'm recording bass, I usually just set the high pass filter to 50. And then the gain staging, like since I DI the bass, like I plug the bass directly into the instrument input here. And I usually have the gain on the bass usually set at like 50 dB. Sometimes I like to push it into this second gain stage here and run it as high as 55 or 60. But that really pushes it pretty hard. And I usually end up leaving the bass around sort of like this sort of a range, okay? And for EQ settings on this, on the guitar, I always set the low end at about 220 and sometimes 110. On the Weezer recording, I think I had it set at 220 maybe, and I might have just boosted just a little bit at 220. And then I think that I had the mids set to 3200, and I think that I just left them flat. And if I did anything, I don't think I did anything with the mids, honestly. I doubt that I did anything there. I might have pushed them a little bit. I can't remember though. I think that around that time I pushed mids around like that sort of thing. And for high frequencies, I don't think I did anything, but if I did, it was set at 10 and I might have boosted it a little bit like that, you know? But I don't typically boost all three bands at the same time, you know? I wouldn't normally do that. So I have a feeling actually what I did in this recording is I don't think I actually added any bass or treble. I think I just added a bit of 3200 hertz here, like 3.2K, and I think I just added about that much just to sort of brighten things up a bit. You know, now that I think about it, I might not have actually used that E906 mic on this recording. I think that I might have used just a regular SM57 that I have banging around here, and I think that that's how I brightened it up, is with this. Yeah, I can't remember for sure now. Yeah, okay, and then for the guitars and the bass, I often am getting into the habit now of running the output on this a little bit lower. And this doesn't affect the tone or the sound of the unit at all. It's just an attenuator, basically. So normally you just run it all the way up, and then you can just bring the volume of the output down a little bit more. The reason I like to do that is because then I can add more gain to the signal with WA2A, and that's part of my sort of my sound and my whole approach to audio. Is just carefully adding different gain stages until you sort of get the final product that you want, you know. And but that, because I run the output on this lower, it allows me to add more gain through this. And the reason why I want to do that is because this is a whole nother tube gain stage that I can add to it, and it sounds incredible, and it does all this cool other organic stuff to the sound. Oh, it's great, you know? So basically, if I only want to have like a little bit of this character from this, then I'll run this preamp basically wide open. But the more and more tube character I want to add into it and sort of like further degrade the sound, if you will, then I bring the output down, and then I can add more and more character from this. I typically am running it sort of in like a 2 to 3 o'clock sort of area here. And usually the peak reduction, let's just move up to here now, I guess. Usually this is set to like 50 or 60, something like that. And you know, when I first got it, I was kind of like nervous to use it and sort of like bashful and stuff. But nowadays, I'm just like cranking the peak reduction up like full blast and not even just caring at all. It's just, oh, it's just so much fun. There's like basically no bad setting on this. It just sounds so good. For anybody that hasn't seen one of these before, this is a compressor, and what it does is it sort of like squishes the volume of your signal down to a more manageable range, and it has the effect of making your audio sound more sort of strong and powerful and just more pleasing to the ear. And it's something that's pretty much used on every recording that's almost ever been made ever since compressors were invented, like decades and decades and decades ago in the golden era of music. So yeah, they're pretty cool. Anyhow, yeah, on this, yeah, getting back to the whole peak reduction thing here, typically for like guitar, I don't compress it as much as bass. I will usually shave off 3 to 5 dB on the guitar, and that sort of gets me to the amount of saturation that I want for the sound. I run the pre-emphasis, which is basically like a high-pass filter on this, so that you can have the dynamics triggering circuitry only be triggered by the high frequencies and not so much the low frequencies. So when I'm doing guitar, I usually run this at around 1 or 2 o'clock, and then when I'm doing bass, I usually run it at around 11 o'clock or so. And yeah, I have lots of fun with that. And just by the way, while I'm thinking about it, I try not to get too lost in the weeds when I'm using this, or too detailed, if you know what I mean. You know, like I really try to get away from that mindset of like, oh, is that the right setting or is that the right one? Oh, is it that? No, maybe it's that one. Oh, no. So no, I try not to do that really on purpose. And I just go like, yeah, that's about the range. Cool, let's move on. Because you end up just spinning your tires, and really, frankly, nobody cares whether the compressor's set that much or that much. You know, at the end of the day, basically, as long as you've got a decent compressor on there and it's doing the job that it's supposed to do, and it's not like overdoing it or underdoing it, and it's just sort of in the range, you know, I think that that's what it's supposed to do, I guess, you know, I don't know.
I don't know. Anyways, output gain. This is, I find like when it's at 20 is sort of like neutral gain on this thing. So that's sort of where it usually lives. But if I want more character, I'll push it basically as high as I can get this knob up. But I typically am running it somewhere between 20 and 60, anywhere in that range. And this is sort of more neutral. And this is like, yeah, I'm like tubifying the heck out of the sound right here. Yeah. And then other than that, oh yeah, and the limit and compress switch here. I basically use it in limit mode when I'm doing bass. Sometimes I put it in limit for guitars as well too, and then compress for. Actually, I use compress all the time too. And on this recording, I think I use compress for the bass and for the guitars. And the reason why I did that is because, or no, I think I used compress for the bass and limit for the guitars because I wanted the tension to sort of have like this interplay between the guitar and the bass, and you can play with the time constants of the attack and the release of the transients of the notes that are getting recorded by altering the compress and the limit functions of this, because that changes the ratio and the attack release settings on the compressor here. And this compressor has like this crazy 2 double release time thing going on. It's like, wow, it's awesome. Anyways, yeah, so when it's on compress, it's a little slower, and so I use that on the bass. And then when it's on limit, it's like it's a higher, more aggressive sort of a sound. And I really like that it kind of gives them their own sort of sonic sort of area to hang out in the mix, you know, and just those subtle little changes. And, you know, just speaking on that, sometimes when you're mixing, you know, it can kind of feel like is that even doing anything? Like all the time you get that feeling. And, but the way you get past that is you have to have faith and you have to believe that all the subtle little changes you are making are going to add up to make a big impact, because that is how you make a big impact. You get a really nice balance of a bunch of subtle nuances that are important to you, and that's how you sort of define your own style and sound and character and all that cool stuff.